Hello and welcome to this MantaPro tutorial video. In this tutorial, we will be going over how to install the add-on and some of its preferences. To begin, we're going to go to Edit, Preferences, going to go to the Add-ons tab, and press the Install button. There, we're going to go to where we downloaded the add-on. For me, that's the Downloads folder, and select the MantaPro zip file, and click Install Add-on. And now you can see this popped up. We are going to check this checkbox. As you can see, there is now a MantaPro tab in the sidebar there. We can press the down arrow and we can now access the preferences. The first preference is the UI mode. UI mode changes the layout of how the UI is displayed. It's set to default. You can set it to simplified, which removes some of the more advanced settings and also renames the existing ones so that they're easier for beginners. You also have the Blender UI, which makes the UI mimic as close as possible the UI Blender has, with the addition of MantaPro tools for the things it does, such as the material and all those. This can be especially useful if you're trying to follow a tutorial for MantaFlow, or you're just used to Blender's UI layout. This will give you all of the features of MantaPro, just mimicking Blender's UI layout. We also have the automatically run auto operations when performing certain actions. That means that the auto operations, which is a very cool feature which automatically does a bunch of things in the background, is enabled anytime you add a domain object or quick setup or other things. That way it tends to always be turned on. If you want to disable auto operations, you probably are going to want to turn off this checkbox so it doesn't get turned back on naturally. And then we have show add buttons in the context list. This is also a nice feature. If you press Ctrl-Shift-C, we pull up this context list, which has all of the lists here, and also the add buttons. If we disable that and press Ctrl-Shift-C, you can see that it's a lot simpler and we don't have the add buttons. And that would just be for quickly switching between which objects are active. We have the move created objects to their correct collections. That is because by default, if we go to collections, you can see they're all filled out. And this will mean that when you have a domain selected and you say, we go here and we add a cube, and we want this to be a flow, then we click that button to select liquid. It automatically moves it from the main collection into the liquid collection so that it will actually be affecting the domain. You can turn that off. We also have the enable experimental features. There's only one experimental feature right now, which is under the vertex modify. As you can see, if we enable it, there is an experimental proximity modify feature. So you can enable that if you want to use that, as it can still be useful. It's just not in a finished state, and some features may not work quite as intended yet. Then we also have next the defaults section. Here you can find the default for auto operations, for which ones are active. By default, all except for the sync viewport selection to list is active. We also have a few other settings, like the default liquid resolutions. So as you can see, we set this to 32. And we also have the same settings for the gas, and say the simulation speed to 2. And then we can delete this. And then we do another quick setup of just the default. You will now see that the maximum resolutions is set to 32 and the simulation speed is set to 2, where before it was set to 1. For example, I tend to like a faster simulation speed, especially when I'm working. And also you can set the default flow type for gas objects. I'm going to set that to fire because that is what I tend to like. But now if we set the default, you can see that it's fire, where before it would have been smoke. And if we set up again, you can see that it is smoke. And then finally, the last section is the key binding. And this is where we have the key binding for the show lists, and the replay clear, which is Control R, which basically sets the timeline frame back to this current frame back to 0, and clears the cache that the replay is using so that any changes you make will be calculated, which is a really useful feature. And here's where you can change the key binding to it. You could also change the key binding here by change shortcut, but also you have the Shift Control C for the show lists, which doesn't actually have a button in the UI, so this is where you change that key binding. So that's pretty much everything. I hope you enjoyed.